my kid?
It's a blur.
Will y'all tell me something? Well, where's my kid? Where is she at?
I didn't know anything. I just wanted her to be okay.
She's alive? Huh?
Come here.
She's not alive. I want to see my child.
I just needed to know, is she alive or is she dead?
Livye Lewis, where is she? Where is she at?
You don't want to sound cliche, but Livye was a perfect child. She was kind and loving. That's why she went into nursing.
She obviously had something about her that she loved to take care of people.
She was selfless.
Where is my child?
I told you she was your child.
In this car. What car?
She's in this car right here behind us.
I didn't know if I wanted to believe that she was in that car. I didn't want her to be. Because if she wasn't, then it was real and she was gone.
How y'all doing? Who was the one that actually drove by? You saw it first?
So I pull over and I seen throughout my passenger seat, and I was like, she must be just slumped over. Maybe she's just drinking. The door was already open. I was like, hey, like I shook her. And that's when I called 911.
911. Somebody's dead.
So what are they looking like to y'all? It was gunshot wound.
6 o'clock in the morning, I'm at home when my telephone rings. Sheriff wanted me to come in, sit with Matthew at the hospital. All right, Matthew Edgar, right?
Yeah.
And while I was there, I interviewed him.
I had no clue why.
No clue.
None.
You have a girlfriend?
Yeah, kinda. I had a girlfriend named Livye.
He was found in the fetal position behind the vehicle that Livye was found in. When's the last time you saw Livye?
Tonight.
He remembers drinking on his porch, and the next thing he remembered, he was waking up in the back of an ambulance. You don't know how you ended up on the ground behind the car?
I think so.
With the dead girl in it.
I don't have a clue.
There was a rifle, some shoes, and a hat, also on the ground.
That's his boots, and he was laying there beside him.
How'd you get all the blood all over your face?
I don't know.
Because the hospital said you don't have any injury.
What are you thinking?
I'm thinking that he's not telling me the truth.
He's just basically telling you a Texas fairy tale, right?
Correct. I'm gonna be flat out honest with you. But unfortunately, there is a deceased female in that vehicle that's in front of yours. And my job is to find out why she's dead.
Who is the dead girl? Did they tell you a name?
Livye. I informed him that Miss Lewis had passed. He started with this, what I would describe as forced crying.
Did you see any tears?
Not a single one.
The world seems to think that Matthew Edgar is a murderer. Do you believe that?
I do not.
Do you believe that someone else pulled that trigger?
I do. I believe it was someone that was close to Matthew, someone that was involved in events of that evening.
We got all the DNA results back, and there were some holes in the case. There were no fingerprints taken or DNA lifted off the gun. There were DNA samples from Livye that showed there was another man.
I have no doubt, and I'm gonna make this perfectly clear. Matthew Edgar killed Miss Lewis.
And you put your reputation on that?
Absolutely.
In the early morning hours of Halloween 2020, a day when the boundaries between the living and the dead become blurred, Livye Lewis was discovered draped over the steering wheel of her car, dead from a rifle shot to the neck.
Here's her ID.
Livye had just turned 19.
I don't know if dispatch has notified her next of kin or not.
It happened in Hemp Hill, a tiny town in Texas with a population just over 1,000, the kind of place where no one is a stranger and news spreads like wildfire.
Isn't that
Darcy Bass's daughter?
Yeah, that's what I was.
That is how Livvy's mother, Darcy Bass, heard the news when a friend called to say that Livye had been shot.
You didn't know if she was dead or alive.
No.
I want to see my child.
And the next time I saw her, she was in a casket.
I can't believe it. I don't believe it. Oh my God.
By all accounts, Livye Lewis was a remarkable young woman, a straight-A student and recent high school grad, with a scholarship to a local college.
So I'm Livye Heather Lewis. Just imagining my future and the goals that I will accomplish makes me excited.
Her dream was to go on to college, become a nurse, and then become a physician's assistant.
Livye was already a certified nursing assistant at a local nursing home.
She was loved by all the residents there.
That's a tough job, too.
Yes, and she loved it. That was her passion.
That's also where she met one of her best friends, fellow nursing assistant Taylor Barnett.
We worked together, and then she just started staying with me all the time.
Taylor was nearly 6 years older and had a young daughter, but she says Livye fit right in.
If you seen Livye, you seen me. We just clicked like automatically.
Bailey Williams met Livye in kindergarten.
She was a person that wanted stability and didn't want to play like the kid games. She was ready to be grown up.
That's probably why Livye fell for an older man, Matthew Edgar, who was 23 when they met.
But I was dating a guy who was actually friends with Matthew, so we all just kind of started hanging out.
Livye was still a senior in high school when she and Matthew began a secret relationship. Matthew was married to Montana Bokel, the mother of his 2 young sons. Phone records indicate that Livye and Matthew began texting each other in November 2019, when Matthew wrote, "You do realize you cannot say a word to anybody that we are even texting, LOL. Livye responded, "Well, obviously I'm not going to brag about texting a married man, but thanks for the clarification." It appears that after a very brief affair, Livye quickly and firmly ended things. But Matthew wasn't done. About 4 months later, he texted to complain about how unhappy he was in his marriage. "I cheated again," he said. But Livye held her ground. "I'm not really down for being a homewrecker," she wrote. Nearly 2 months later, Matthew ended his marriage in this text exchange with his wife, where he said, "Ain't you, it's me. Me always cheating on you." 4 days later, Montana hired a divorce attorney. Matthew moved out and circled back to Livye. At just 18, Livye was now navigating a relationship with a man who had 2 young sons and a soon-to-be ex-wife.
At first, they didn't get along. Livye and Montana didn't. I think that was out of jealousy on Montana's behalf. And then it was kind of just like the flip of a switch. All of a sudden, Montana wanted to be Livye's best friend, and they talked all the time.
I think in Livye's eyes, she was definitely thinking she had a friend.
And in Montana's eyes, what do you think?
I think that she was jealous. I think that some people get close to people and they have another reasoning behind it.
And so do you think in some ways a dangerous love triangle had formed?
Yes, definitely a dangerous love triangle, yes.
You can call it that, absolutely.
Sabine County Sheriff's investigator J.P. McDonough questioned Matthew about his relationship with Montana and Livye.
And what's your relationship like with both of them?
It's awesome.
Okay, so it's not a typical, I hate your guts.
Hell no.
Okay.
It's awesome.
Okay.
My ex-wife and her, they're big buddies.
I just told Livye to just be cautious. You can get along with her for their children, but don't be too close with her. I mean, because that's his ex-wife.
But Taylor says that as time went by, it was Matthew's behavior that became the most menacing.
He was pretty much abusive in more ways than one. For a little while, he was staying at my house with her, and he would just get drunk and crazy and either holler at her, and like it got so bad that like I didn't want him there at my house anymore.
Phone records show that the relationship was a roller coaster ride. While at times Matthew sent texts to Livy like, "Good night, baby, I love you." Livy's texts alleged physical abuse. "I don't know why you keep putting your hands on me like that. My body hurts today."
I think that she was in love with who Matthew could be because she knew who he was and knew that what he was doing to her wasn't right, but she still stayed.
Livy had been planning on moving to her new college campus. But in the summer of 2020, she stayed on that roller coaster ride, agreeing to move in with Matthew and help take care of him and his sons. She even redecorated the boys' rooms.
Went to baseball, went to football, went to soccer ball, whatever.
But things seemed to have quickly turned ugly.
In August of 2020, Livy writes to Matthew, "I want to be in our home with you, but I can't do the way you act when you drink. I'm scared of you. You've laid your hands on me multiple times. I deserve better than that." Had she told you at that time that
No,
she
she
had
didn't.
been violent?
No, she didn't tell me that. Probably figured that I would go do something crazy, and she didn't want me probably getting in trouble.
Livy did tell her cousin Sydney Ebar what was going on.
She sent you a disturbing photograph.
Yes.
Evidence of physical abuse, correct?
Yes, sir.
And do you have that photo?
I do.
Can you show it to me?
Yes, sir. He busted her nose.
It's not clear what caused the altercation, but texts would later show that Matthew was cheating on Livy with, of all people, Montana. On October 4th, 2020, Livy's birthday, Matthew texted Montana, "I didn't cheat on Livy with multiple women, just you, LOL."
He was continuing a relationship on with his ex-wife and had my daughter in the middle of it, not knowing that she was being manipulated by all of them.
I was in an abusive relationship, so I just said, "Livy, you know it gets worse." And she said, "I know," and I said, "Okay, I love you."
Livy broke up with Matthew. But in a small town like Hemp Hill, you can run, but you can't really hide. In the early morning hours of Halloween 2020, Matthew and Livy would end up together again on the side of this road. The morning Livye Lewis was killed on the side of the road, her ex-boyfriend Matthew Edgar found himself in a hospital bed, claiming he had no idea how he got there.
I had no clue why I'm here.
Despite the blood on his face, Matthew wasn't injured, but he did admit to sheriff's investigator J.P. McDonough that he'd been drinking.
How much?
Bottle, Jim Beam.
Jim Beam? Anything else?
A few beers earlier in the day.
He said he'd been at a party the night before at his friend Bobby Ozant's house. That's when he claims he last saw Livy.
She and her, my ex-wife, both was there.
Okay. Oh, so you left Bobby's, went to your house? You went home?
I was at my house.
Okay.
And that's where Matthew claims he blacked out and simply can't explain how he ended up in a fetal position between a black truck that wasn't his and Livy's car.
You don't know how you ended up on the ground behind the car?
No, sir.
With the dead girl in it?
I don't have a clue.
McDonough took swabs of the blood on Matthew's face for DNA testing.
All right, Matthew, I'm going to do this one on the chin.
And Matthew's clothing was taken into evidence.
I'm going to go through some of your clothes, okay?
Yes, sir.
Then McDonough placed Matthew under arrest.
Charge is going to be homicide. All right? Now pay attention to me. I want you to understand why, okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You were found behind the vehicle where the decedent was. There was some kind of relationship between you and her. There is a weapon laying on the ground behind the vehicle, close to where you were found. Okay? Based on that and a few other things, I'm going to place you in custody right now for homicide, okay?
What's his reaction to that?
He had none.
But he didn't say, "You're going to do what?" I didn't do anything. Nothing at all.
Nothing at all.
With Matthew jailed, McDonough was on a legal deadline. According to Texas law, the district attorney's office now had 90 days to present enough evidence to a grand jury to indict Matthew, or they would have to release him on bond. So McDonough enlisted the help of the Texas Rangers and began piecing together what happened to Livy.
Matthew was just an easy arrest.
Sean Dunn is an old friend of Matthew's.
He told me, "Hey, look, I didn't do this. Yes, I was there at the scene, but I did not do this. I loved her."
Sean, a former Texas oil and gas man, once employed a then 20-year-old Matthew as a supervisor on his pipeline.
I know Matthew. I spent a lot of time with him. He was a hard worker. He loved his family. He valued his friendship with people.
Sean was also once a deputy sheriff and says in his personal and professional opinion, Matthew is innocent.
When you're in law enforcement and you sit across the table from somebody that has taken someone's life as a cold-blooded killer, there's a certain feel that you get from that person. I never seen him reach that point.
Sean believes Matthew when he says he has no memory of what happened.
The cause of death for that girl is not natural.
And thinks this moment
Did they tell you her name?
Libby.
Was very real.
I believe that was genuine, that was the first time that he knew that she was deceased.
Which raises the obvious question,
If Matthew Edgar did not kill Livy, who did?
That's kind of still up in the air. In my opinion, there's plenty of other people that could be involved in this.
Sean won't name names, but Matthew and his mother Cindy have insinuated that someone else killed Livy, Montana. Listen to this recorded jailhouse call.
But I'm saying, Matthew, if it turns out that Montana did this,
I don't want to talk about it, please.
I mean, it's not going to make you want to hurt her because she killed the woman you loved, are you?
I don't know.
Sheriff's investigator J.P. McDonough says Montana's unusual friendship with Livy did get his attention.
My husband left me for this woman, but she's my best friend. I have to question that as an investigator.
This is one of the last photos ever taken of Livy. She is with Montana, and they are at that party Matthew told investigators about at Bobby Ozan's place.
I'm going to say there's probably about 20 people there,
including Matthew and Montana's sons. Bobby told investigators Matthew spent the night watching Livy and Montana party with everyone but him.
He would try to come over there and talk to them, and they just really wouldn't say much to him. They were just basically ignoring him.
Investigators learned that Livy had broken up with Matthew just weeks earlier, and he had taken up with another young woman in town.
I am trying to find out your relationship with Matthew Edgar.
We were having sex. I met him that Monday, and we saw each other every day.
So you just known him a week?
Yeah.
But it was clear to Bobby that Matthew wasn't over Livy.
He was just hurt, and then now she don't want nothing to do with him no more. She's going on with her life just like you don't exist anymore.
Bobby says Matthew was stewing at the party.
He just wasn't himself. He's on edge, just drinking beer.
And drinking heavily?
Yes, sir, yeah.
And the more he drank, the angrier he got.
Exactly.
What do you think of Matthew Edgar's story? Chat now with the 48 Hours team on Facebook and X.
As the party at Bobby Ozan's was winding down, Matthew Edgar says he called it a night.
Oh, so you left Bobby's, went to your house, you went home?
I was at my house.
That's where Matthew's memory goes blank. But his ex-wife, Montana Bokel, remembers much more.
The day is October the 31st.
In this audio recording, Montana told investigators Matthew suddenly came back to the party and learned that Livy had decided to stay overnight at Bobby's.
You think he heard Livy say she's gonna stay the night?
Oh, I know he heard her, because that's what made him so mad.
During the course of the investigation, and during my interviews with family and friends, and Matthew had intended to ask Miss Lewis to marry him. That's how significant he felt about Miss Lewis. To hear her back at the house say that I'm gonna stay with Bobby was just...
Meaning sleep with Bobby.
Correct.
That was too much.
It was just too much.
According to Montana, Matthew was so angry, he even took it out on her.
He tried to choke me, and then that's when I went and got Bobby.
So I went outside, and he had kicked all the doors in on our car and was punching on the window.
At one point, Bobby had to pin Matthew against the car in order for the girls to be able to leave.
The whole time I'm holding him, he's screaming top his lungs, I'm gonna kill y'all, I'm gonna kill y'all.
Montana says she and Livy left in separate cars. In search of safety, Montana says she headed toward the home where Matthew's mother and grandparents lived, and that's where Matthew caught up with her.
He pulled in behind me. I went to get out, and he started choking me again.
Their children were in the back seat of Matthew's van.
And I was honking the horn so somebody would come outside.
In all the racket, Montana says Matthew left and headed for his own home a short distance away on the same property. A shaken Montana says she asked to stay the night with Matthew's mother and grandparents, and then began texting with Matthew.
I have a message.
What does he say?
You took part in it, and you are guilty as she is, wrote Matthew, as he angrily accused Montana of playing a part in Livy's decision to spend the night with Bobby Ozan. Those texts would become damning evidence in the case against Matthew Edgar.
He said, you knew what was going on.
A decision that appears to have enraged him.
He said, I will take your life, her life, and his life, mark my words.
At 3:22 a.m., Matthew texts, I'm leaving. Better get here and get your kids. McDonough says evidence shows that a drunk and angry Matthew then got behind the wheel of his truck, where he kept his rifle and went hunting for Livy.
I think she pulled over to talk to him, and I'll tell you why. She was just sitting there with her legs crossed. Indicates to me she was not afraid. It was not a fight or flight thing where she was prepared to just bolt out the car. She was actually, to some degree, comfortable with who she was speaking with.
12 minutes after texting, I'm leaving, Matthew texted, I'm home. I got Livy's keys and her phone. Montana asked, where is she? Matthew's response, dead. Montana told investigators she didn't call 911 because she didn't believe he was serious. Instead, Montana texted Matthew, can I come down there? His reply, yeah. But Montana claims that Matthew's mother wouldn't let her leave, so she just fell asleep.
I never left. I didn't even know anything had happened until I woke up at around 6 o'clock this morning.
But Matthew didn't go to bed. McDonough says evidence shows that not long after sending that text that Livy was dead, Matthew did something no one can explain. He went back to the crime scene, this time in his cousin Zach's truck. It's that truck that was found parked behind Livy's car.
Why would he go back then? Why would he return to the scene of the crime?
That would be a question you'd have to ask Matthew. I can't explain that.
Also hard to explain, Montana's failure to call 911. It made no sense to Livy's friend, Bailey.
She knew who he was and what type of person he was. And then she was receiving all those texts. I don't think that you can just take that with a grain of salt after you've received those text messages.
Yeah, it's time to call police.
Right.
McDonough says he and his team of investigators wondered if Montana had been to the crime scene that morning, to try and help Matthew cover up Livye's murder.
I know you don't believe me, but I can't tell you stuff that I don't know happened.
2 months after the crime, Montana was given a polygraph exam.
Are you covering for the person responsible for Livye's death?
After monitoring her physiological responses, Montana was told she failed the polygraph.
There's no doubt that you left something out. There's something you're not telling me.
But after an in-depth, multi-agency investigation, investigators concluded that Montana was never at the crime scene and had nothing to do with Livye's shooting or any cover-up.
And so to all those who think somehow she's involved, you say?
Not true.
Not true at all.
All the evidence, says McDonough, points to one person, Matthew Edgar.
Is there a motive in your mind?
Jealousy.
Jealousy.
Plain and simple.
In February 2021, the COVID pandemic shut down the courts and this case. With no grand juries being convened, a judge was forced by law to release a still unindicted Matthew Edgar on a reasonable bond, $50,000.
For them to set it so low was insane to me.
Months after Matthew's release, Darcy was at her local convenience store when Matthew just strolled in.
When he came in the door, I just started throwing whatever at him and went for him. And I just remember saying, "You killed my daughter. You killed my daughter." And that's...
Matthew pressed charges against Darcy, and she was arrested. The charges would eventually be dropped, but Darcy says she just wanted some answers.
She loved you and she was good to you and your kids and to your family. What made you think that this was the answer to anything that was going on?
On March 16th, 2021, 4.5 months after his arrest,
Charge is going to be homicide.
A grand jury finally heard the evidence against Matthew Edgar and indicted him for the murder of Livye Lewis. But Matthew, who was still out on bail, wasn't done breaking the law and tormenting Livye's family.
I just was like, are you serious?
As January 2022 and the trial of Matthew Edgar approached, Darcy Bass was confident that the evidence in the murder of her daughter Livye would finally prove that Matthew had killed her.
What in this case struck you as the most powerful evidence against Matthew Edgar?
From him saying that he was going to kill her, till him being at the scene, till it being his gun.
Then there were all those venomous texts between Matthew and Montana that Taylor and Bailey say ended with a clear confession.
When he texted and said, "She's dead."
Because who would know that except
The person who did it.
And remember that text that read, "I got Livye's keys and her phone." Well, Livye's phone was found in the truck Matthew had driven to the crime scene. Her keys were found on the driveway at his grandparents' house and reluctantly handed over to investigators by Matthew's mother, Cindy Hogan.
Is it true, in your opinion, that she tried to keep Livye's keys from investigators?
That was the indication.
Cindy Hogan also tried to help her son by suggesting that Livye had been killed by a drug cartel because Matthew owed them money.
And that the cartel had killed Livye and staged it to make it look like Matthew did it because they were out $30,000.
What do you think of that theory?
I think it's a far-fetched fairy tale.
It was so far-fetched. It was just a crazy story to try to distract people from the truth.
On Monday, January 24th, 2022, the trial of Matthew Edgar began with jury selection. Matthew, who is still out on bond, walked in and out of court every day like a free man.
Due to the nature of the crime and the emotion throughout the county, we had security arrangements in place for trial. We even had Matthew wearing a bulletproof vest.
On the first day of testimony, the state began presenting its case, which included DNA lab results that detected a tiny speck of Livye's blood on the pants Matthew was wearing when he was found at the crime scene.
How important is that piece of evidence?
It's critical. It puts him there at the time that injury caused her death.
But Matthew's court-appointed defense attorney, Rob Hughes, argued that a tiny drop of blood doesn't prove a thing.
How else could that speck have gotten on his pant leg if not coming from blood spatter from the shooting?
You can get DNA transferred from just touching someone.
Hughes says there's no telling how long that blood had been there. And all that blood on Matthew's face that McDonough swabbed and had tested, it wasn't Livye's or Matthew's. And once they were excluded, investigators didn't pursue other matches. Hughes says there were additional DNA tests that also raised questions about who else may have been at the crime scene.
There were other people's DNA on Matthew, and Livye was excluded as a contributor to those DNA samples.
Hughes tried his best to argue that the DNA should be considered reasonable doubt, but admits that his biggest obstacle in defending Matthew were those texts and Matthew's insistence that he has no memory of sending them.
In your entire career as a defense attorney, have you ever had a client who was functioning during the course of a crime, texting, conversing with people, driving an automobile, who then said they had no memory whatsoever of the events?
I have not.
And you understand why that would be hard for people to believe?
Yes.
Hughes also asserted that the murder weapon had not been tested for fingerprints or DNA, but conceded the rifle belonged to Matthew. After a second day of testimony, the prosecutor notified Hughes that he would be resting his case the next morning, and it would then be Hughes's turn to call witnesses. Sean Dunn says that he had been Snapchatting with Matthew, who was feeling optimistic about his chances.
He was so confident that he was going to need a job and asked me, would I find him a spot to go to work?
But the next morning, as Rob Hughes arrived at the courthouse, he got a panicked call from Matthew's mother, who told him her son was now a fugitive.
She just started frantically telling me that Matthew was gone. Matthew had run and he had taken a gun with him. She was afraid he was going to kill himself.
Are you serious? Like, he's gone? He shouldn't even been out on bond. Then he had an ankle monitor on. What happened with that?
Authorities say Matthew had simply waited for the battery on his ankle monitor to die, and then left home, most likely on foot.
We started getting assets from all over. Lufkin PD, SWAT, DPS, Texas Rangers. We even had tracking dogs from the prison unit. They followed a trail through the woods, roughly 2 miles.
Meanwhile, Matthew's trial went on without him. That very same day, defense attorney Rob Hughes began presenting his case. The jury was not told that Matthew had fled, but they must have wondered.
So a case that's already very difficult for you has now become, I'll use the word, impossible.
It made it it didn't help, that's for sure.
No one was surprised when, after deliberating for about an hour and a half, the jury found Matthew Edgar guilty of murder. But he was still on the loose, out there somewhere, an armed threat to himself and the community.
I mean, I think that it was like a scary time because it's Hemphill. He knows where everybody lives at.
That was a terrible, crazy time for me, knowing that he's out there, supposedly loved my daughter, but murdered her. And me, the one that's actively trying to make sure that he goes to jail, what would he have done to me?
Darcy says it felt like no one was searching for Matthew, so she became a mother on a mission and hung this homemade wanted poster all over town. But she wasn't alone. J.P. McDonough had been joined by Jeff Coulter, a special deputy with the Eastern District U.S. Marshal Service, and they were on the hunt for Matthew.
Do you consider him right off the bat to be a dangerous fugitive?
Oh, absolutely. From what I was told from the murder, the crime scene, yes, no doubt.
See a timeline of the night of the murder at 48hours.com.
But her car was right here before this sign.
This is the very spot where 19-year-old Livye Lewis was murdered. now a memorial lovingly tended to by her mother, Darcy.
I just want everyone to remember what happened here, what Livy had to go through.
It's also a place that Darcy is convinced Matthew Edgar visited after becoming a fugitive.
I just felt it as a mother. I was like, he's coming here. He's not far.
Darcy says she also heard rumors that Matthew's mother had been spotted buying her son's favorite cigarettes and liquor in large quantities.
Where's she taking them to?
1 week after Matthew ran from the law, Jeff Coulter, a special deputy with the U.S. Marshals, was asked to take over the manhunt.
When you first begin your investigation, do you start with his family to see if they've heard anything?
No, I don't like being lied to. I've already heard their stories claiming she was killed by the cartel, so no, I didn't even waste my time.
Coulter says he quietly spent nearly a year working with the sheriff's office and other law enforcement agencies around the country to chase down every lead that came their way.
We had put in a lot of hours, a lot of weekends, a lot of late nights.
Then a tip that Matthew might actually be hiding in plain sight, just yards from his grandparents' property, in this house.
It looked great, it sounded great, but we physically have to put eyes on him before we make a move on this residence.
The house, which belonged to a family friend, was surrounded by woodlands, so Coulter enlisted the aid of 2 wardens with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. The plan? To get as close as possible, under the cloak of darkness, using night vision to ID their man.
We were going to enter into the woods, make our way up to the back of the property, get as close as we could, and sit there and see if we could get a visual of him.
While Coulter led a team of 3 men into the woods, J.P. McDonough and his deputies were on the opposite side of the house, near the driveway, but out of sight in their vehicles.
My job was to sit right there at the front door of that house.
If Coulter and his men made a positive ID on Matthew, they would finally have him cornered.
We went in about 4:30 in the afternoon. We knew it was going to get dark about 5:30. We got to probably about 100 yards of the house, and we heard barking. Come to find out they had a pretty good-sized Rottweiler in the backyard. And we're out there for an hour or so. We could hear voices. We could hear a female voice. We could hear a male voice. But it's so thick we can't see. Then we catch a violent thunderstorm. Lightning and thunder and torrential rain. It was miserable. But it was a blessing in disguise. And the noise covered our movement.
They were 30 yards from the house when a second storm hit. But there was no giving up.
That's 11 months and 2 days. This needed to end tonight.
Drenched and exhausted, Coulter and his team could hear voices on the back porch of the house, but couldn't see faces. Until about 8 p.m., when a man stepped off the porch.
Walks around the side of the house, and he stands there.
One of Coulter's men immediately recognized that man as Matthew Edgar.
He goes, "He's here. I got eyes on him."
We got word that they had made a confirmation. Drove down, pulled in the driveway.
Back. Watch the front. I got movement. They're in the house.
Once we saw the lights, it was a 30-yard sprint, all 4 of us. We break the corner, and we started screaming, "Law enforcement, police."
Sheriff's office, anybody outside, come out with your hands up!
He jumps up, and he throws himself against the wall like, oh, crap.
You got me.
Yeah, it was over with.
Did you guys make eye contact?
Absolutely. He said, "Hey, JP." I said, "Hey, Matthew." And then he asked me, "You hadn't proven my innocence yet?" And I said, "No, Matthew. I have not."
Coulter says that's not all Matthew had to say that night.
He said, "Please don't shoot my mother."
Mother, please come out of the house.
His mother is in the house.
His mother's at the house.
Was she crying? Was she upset?
No, I think she acted amazed that he was there, like she didn't know what was going on.
Really?
Yes. Surprised he was there.
I'm going to jail for something I don't even know nothing about.
Was she arrested as well?
Not at the time. She was not.
Can somebody get my purse with my seizure medicine?
Cindy Hogan was eventually charged with hindering apprehension. We reached out to her attorney for comment, but did not hear back. On January 3rd, 2023, Matthew Edgar was formally sentenced for the murder of Livye Lewis. 99 years in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 30 years.
Does it give you, I don't know what the word is, not any peace, but in prison, he will likely suffer for decades.
Can only hope. But he doesn't suffer like her brother. He doesn't suffer like her little sister.
Darcy hopes to be there when Matthew comes up for parole, and Taylor and Bailey say she won't be alone.
And I don't care. However, he says that he changes while he's in there. I don't think that that's something you can ever come back from, because she's definitely not coming back.
Meanwhile, Darcy is trying to save up enough money to buy a headstone for Livye's grave.
How do you carry on and honor your daughter's memory?
I just got to get up every morning and just remember the good things. And I want to make her proud.
I don't want her to be remembered as the girl that got killed in the small town. I want her to be remembered for the way that she carried herself and the happy person that she was to be around.
CBS next Saturday.
What is your emergency?
I accidentally shot my wife. A former deputy sheriff accused of killing his wife.
I accidentally shoot more than once. It didn't make sense. It didn't line up. Do you think it was accidental? I guess that's the million-dollar question.
48 Hours is all new. CBS next Saturday, 10/9 Central, and streaming on Paramount+.
Welcome back to Post-mortem. I'm your host, Anne Marie Green, and today we're discussing the case of Livye Lewis, who was murdered by her ex-boyfriend, Matthew Edgar, following an argument at a party. But then during his murder trial, he fled when his ankle monitor battery died, and he evaded authorities for nearly a year. So joining me now to discuss this is correspondent Peter Van Sant and producer Judy Rybak. Thanks for joining us, guys. Hi.
Hey, Anne-Marie, good to see you.
Okay, and as per usual, remember everyone, if you haven't listened to this 48 Hours episode yet, head on over to your podcast feed. You're going to find the episode just below this one right there. Go over there and listen, and then come on back for this conversation. All right, this murder occurs in Hemp Hill, Texas. We've done some stories in some small communities, and having worked in small towns, what you find is that everyone knows everyone. This is a really small community. About 1,000 people live there. What was it like visiting such a small town?
I don't think I've ever been in a town that small, as you say. Like, we've been in a lot of small towns, and, there's not a lot to do. They do a lot of riding around, drinking, basically.
Right.
Fishing, hunting.
Repeat.
Yeah.
Right.
And when friends heard that Livye was dead, they thought it was a car accident because that's how most of their friends die.
Mm.
So it turns out that before becoming Livye's boyfriend, Matthew Edgar had not one, not two, but 3 high-speed chases in one day with law enforcement.
Wow.
The last one ended up in an accident in which the deputy chasing him had a broken leg, and he was arrested. When we learned about this, we talked with Darcy, Livye's mom, about it. And I said, as a parent myself, I said, well, did you warn your daughter, stay away from Matthew Edgar? And she goes, no, if I did that, I'd be judging him. And I don't like to judge people. And besides, I've made some mistakes in my life. So it's just kind of a different way of thinking.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of them have records.
So the thing about a small town, though, clearly they've investigated their fair share of high-speed chases, but probably not murders, right? So were they prepared for this? Was this challenging for them?
Oh, so challenging. I just don't think they'd ever seen anything like this before. So they had to call in state troopers and, reinforcement. There were a lot of cops at the scene of the crime.
We are taken at the very start of the hour to the death scene, and you're hearing the shrieks of Darcy, the mom, and where's my baby? Where is she? And it was so real and devastating.
Yeah, when I watched that video with Darcy, I could feel my hands clenching, and I was like, just tell her what's going on. How does Darcy feel about how it was handled?
Oh, she's still so angry. I mean, rightfully, right? She had to learn through the grapevine in town. They didn't call her right away. I think Matthew's family knew before Darcy did, which is, because he was in the hospital too. But imagine being the last one to know.
And you're the mother.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Most protocols with law enforcement, there would be an officer who would approach her, come over here, come sit in my squad car. We'll talk to you about the situation, to allow her out there to just shout and scream and be ignored. And those, those cold stares back at her were just terrible. Mm-hmm. And she was sensing, of course, that her daughter was gone and no one was telling her, but it was torture.
And you counted how many times she asked. It was something like 23 times. Yeah.
Where's my baby? Where is she? Where is
what
my daughter?
Happened to her?
What happened? Where? And they just stared at her. And that is not protocol. That was a mistake. And they admitted later that was handled very poorly. There was one character, though, that both of us just really fell for. The Sabine County Sheriff's investigator, J.P. McDonough.
Yeah.
And J.P. was just right out of central casting. He had the perfect Texas-sounding voice. And his initial interviewing of Matthew Edgar on that stretcher that you'll see, if you haven't seen the hour yet, it's unlike anything I have had on 48 Hours before. Sheriff's body cams capturing this bloody suspect lying down. And J.P. does a masterful job of connecting with him and getting him to open up. And the questioning went on, and you're sitting there going, Matthew, you're digging yourself a hole here. And he eventually talked his way into getting arrested by the end of it. But J.P. McDonough, he was a really smart, rural guy, knew how to talk to the locals, and he did a great job.
Yeah.
He locked him into his story that day, that he didn't remember what happened.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk to you guys about the DNA tests because, the case sort of feels straightforward, but one thing that was surprising to me, and I'm sort of surprising to investigators, is there's blood on Edgar's face, and that blood does not actually match him or Livy. So then, whose blood is it? Any theories?
This is one of the strangest aspects of this story for Judy and me. On that deputy's body cam, and you're looking at Matthew Edgar's face, it is covered in blood. And to this day, they still don't know whose blood it is. There was a theory that it was Bobby Ozan, this man who they were partying at that house, and they had a little struggle outside by this automobile as Matthew Edgar was trying to give chase to Livy.
They suspect it was Bobby's, but they never bothered to test to see if it was Bobby's.
Right. I actually was surprised that Bobby was willing to talk to you guys because I felt like they're at his house partying. She's going to stay over there is what we're getting.
Yeah.
And I just thought he would want to have nothing to do with this case because everyone involved he's well acquainted with, and it must have been tough.
I think he feels guilty about what happened, but our field producer, Iris, and I went to town early to convince J.P. McDonough to do an interview, to meet with Bobby and convince him to do an interview. It wasn't easy. It's never really easy, but yeah.
And it was a great get by Judy because he had the front row seat, as we like to say, to all of this. And he knew the intricacies of these relationships. And he's also a great storyteller. And as a quick aside, by the way, he has a hobby on the side. He catches giant catfish with his bare hands. And he showed us
I've
video.
seen that before.
He goes underwater. He said he can hold his breath up to 2 minutes. And then all of a sudden he comes out and he's put his arm all the way down the throat of a giant catfish that may weigh 25, 30 pounds and pulls it out of the water. It's the darndest thing you've ever seen.
That's quite a skill. Welcome back. When Livy's family and friends find out that she has been killed, did they think of anyone else who could possibly be responsible for this? They were focused.
Yeah.
Yeah, they know who did it.
It was pretty clear.
Yeah.
We know that Matthew Edgar was abusive to Livy, not just emotionally, but there was that picture that her cousin showed us of her bloody nose. And, there was a history of violence. The prosecution said there was a mountain of evidence that pointed at Matthew Edgar. He's found at the crime scene, unharmed. He's not injured in any way. There was that text to Montana, it's his ex-wife. Yeah, and saying Livy was dead. There were multiple texts, and they had that huge fight that night.
This relationship that these people had and the fact that he had beaten her in the past, it was the drink and argue and fight, make up, rinse, repeat, do it again.
Right.
But no one ever thought this would lead to murder.
So is this why at that party, Montana doesn't call the police, Bobby doesn't call the police when, they can see that Edgar is drunk, that things are ratcheting up? No one even thinks like, oh, he shouldn't get behind the wheel.
Bobby told us we just don't call the cops on each other because, as Peter has said, it's, this is a pattern. And so he just thought they would all wake up the next day and start over again.
And they take care of their own. They take care of their own circumstances. We don't need a deputy here.
Right.
You and I will take care of it. It may end up in a fist fight. It may end up in some slapping around, some screaming and shouting, but eventually they'll sort it out, and tomorrow's another day.
So early on in this investigation, investigators believe that Montana helped Edgar maybe cover up the crime scene. They didn't find any evidence that she participated at all, though. But what made investigators initially suspect her?
It's kind of a crazy story. So the pants that he was wearing when they found him had her name written inside, like on the label. You know how when you label kids' clothes when they go to camp? So it had her name, not his. And what they thought was that she had gone down there and brought him clean
Her
clothing.
pants.
Right. But then they later found out that she was the one who took all the clothing to the cleaners, to the laundromat. And so she had written her name in everything.
Yeah, when they were married, she put her name on his clothes and hers. The other thing, though, the connection that they had was that, remember, Edgar had texted Montana that Livy was dead.
Did Montana take that text seriously, or what did she think of that text?
She wouldn't talk to us. She's left town and wants nothing to do with any of this.
Montana was thoroughly investigated, right?
Yep.
Yes.
There was a multi-agency investigation into this murder, and all of the investigators concluded that Montana had nothing to do with the death of Livye Lewis.
So Edgar is arrested in the hospital just hours after Livy's murder. I'm wondering, did you guys try to get an interview with him?
Oh, yeah. We always try to get interviews with everybody. We want to talk to everybody. But yes, I spoke to his new wife.
His new wife?
Yes, he is married, got married while he was in prison, but he knew her before he went to prison.
Is she from the same town?
Yeah. I got her number. I spoke to her. She said, yeah, he wants to talk to you guys. So we sent him a letter. And the day that they gave him the letter, he said no. He didn't want to do it. And then the next day he changed his mind. But then there's like this weird procedure where they had to wait another 30 days or 60 days to ask him a second time. They had to give him time to think about it. But in the interim, the family just circled the wagons around him and said, no, he's not talking to you. We're not talking to you. None of us are talking to you.
So in February of 2021, the COVID pandemic shuts down the courts. That's been happening with a lot of the cases that we've been covering lately. In this case, Edgar's released on a $50,000 bond. It feels light for a murder suspect.
Yeah, so Texas law was that they could only hold him for so long. And if he was still unindicted, they had to let him go. Well, he was still unindicted. And the law states that it has to be a reasonable bond. So they set the bond at $50,000. And, the family, I think, went to a bail bondsman and got him out.
Right.
And after he was released on bail, he was arrested again for assaulting Montana. And this time bail was set at $325,000. And the family, they were able to pay that bond. Now, it's usually 10% down, but that's $32,000 they'd have to come up with to get him out.
Wait, he's out on bond, accused of killing his ex-girlfriend, and he assaults his ex-wife?
No, they dipped back into the case, right? So that same night he had assaulted Montana. So they wanted to try and get him back behind bars. So they charged him with assaulting Montana. That made Livy's mother, Darcy, crazy too. Like, murder gets a $50,000 bond and assault gets a $325,000 bond. But I think they were trying to make up for the $50,000 mistake.
It didn't make much of a difference because he still managed to post anyways. So then the big twist in this story comes when the battery on Edgar's ankle monitor, it dies and he goes on the run in the middle of the trial. The jury was not told this, though, that he fled. I mean, you would think that would be a factor that the jury should be able to consider. I mean, if you're not guilty, why are you running? One could argue.
No, I think it's prejudicial and you don't really know why he's run and it's not fair, I guess. But in the state of Texas, once a trial starts, it doesn't stop.
Yep.
So he's not there, though.
He's not there. His family's not there. The jury had to know something strange was happening,
This
right?
is the second time this season I've had that happen on a story where the defendant just didn't show up. And yeah, they're looking around and obviously, where'd he go? And imagine being the defense attorney in this case, too, where you're trying to come up with something that can spare him and he flees. It's curtains after that, to say the least.
They ultimately find him, but it takes like a year because he's out
almost a year.
Oh, yeah, he's out on the run. He's actually found guilty while he's on the run, and now investigators have to figure out how to find him. Which this was so fascinating. He's ultimately found hiding in plain sight. Right? He's
Somebody tipped them off that they must have seen him or heard something. Because again, small town, it's going to happen sooner or later. But he was right in their backyard. And I did not realize this, that most people who run stay fairly close to home unless they're going over the border or they don't have, family to support them. But if they have a support system, they're not going anywhere.
So Edgar's mother, Cindy Hogan, was actually at the house. We see it in the hour and eventually charged with hindering apprehension. What's the current status of her case?
The case just keeps going on and on and on. It's one hearing after another. Iris and I went to one of the hearings to try and convince her to talk to us. And she emphatically said no. Her lawyer literally put himself between us and her. But yeah, she's either going to have to make a deal or it's going to go to trial. But this could go on for some time, I think.
January 3rd of 2023, Edgar is formally sentenced to 99 years in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 30 years. What is the likelihood that he could actually get out in 30 years?
So in order to get out at that point, he's going to have to confess to the murder. I mean, you go before a parole board, they're not letting you out until you show remorse and confess to he's got 30 years to think about it. And at that point, he might just do it to get out. You just don't know, right?
And remember, Matthew Edgar's defense and his story was so outrageous and offensive to the family that he was so drunk that he doesn't remember this killing.
Right.
Despite the fact that while he was inebriated, he was sending text messages and talking to people and driving an automobile and stuff. It was a ridiculous story.
We talked about Livy a little bit earlier, and the sense that I got from her is that she would have been going places. She would have eventually left that town. It felt like anyways.
Yeah. And she was an outlier in that she was academically accomplished. She had goals in life. She was going to university, and she had her escape. It was right there in front of her. And yet that culture pulled her back in.
Such a sliding door moment, right?
Absolutely. It's clear that Darcy loved her daughter, obviously. Peter, you went with her to a memorial that she had put up for her daughter. What was that like?
It was really heartbreaking. We got to know Darcy, who admits in her own life she's made a lot of mistakes, but Livy for her was her accomplishment. Giving birth, raising that young girl who became successful. She was her dream child. And it was everything in her life that gave her meaning, is that I raised this extraordinary person with all the mistakes that I made along the way. Look what I've produced. And to have that taken away. When you're at that little memorial for Darcy, it means just everything. It's just precious. And she tends to it, and she feels the presence of her daughter there. And it's just awful. At the end of the day, murder reverberates and destroys so many other people's lives. And poor Darcy, I hope she can get back on the rails. But this is such a blow because her daughter was everything.
Yeah. Well, it was a great hour as usual.
Thank you.
Peter, Judy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.
And of course, want to remind you guys, if you like the series Postmortem, please rate and review 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts and follow 48 Hours wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also listen ad-free on the Amazon Music Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or the 48 Hours Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening.